What's been called the Arab Spring is actually an Islamist ascendancy. It's one that the Muslim Brotherhood has actually built toward for really almost a century since its founding. And now what is being unleashed is a very fundamentalist understanding of Sharia. Sharia is Islam's framework for society. It is basically a civilizational plan that would control all of human existence, from the great things down to the small.
People are shouting, they're singing, cars are honking their horns.
It was rendered as the Arab Spring by people who were either hopeful or delusional in the West that what it meant was a birth of democracy.
The term Muslim Brotherhood is an umbrella term for a variety of movements. In the case of Egypt, largely secular.
Mohammed Morsi is the candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's the first Islamist head of state to be elected out of these Arab Spring revolutions.
Within weeks of Mohammed Morsi's taking power, he actually was able to neutralize the military, get his own people into important positions of power in the military and intelligence structure, begin using the prosecutor's power to unleash Islamic supremacism as the dominant culture of the society. What the government was saying in the early 90s, and I think what it's still saying today, is that there's about a half dozen fringe lunatics someplace that want to blow everybody up. From prosecuting the blind sheikh, it became very apparent to me that Islamist ideology, this Islamic supremacism, which is the classic Islam of the Middle East, is a much more mainstream interpretation of Islam than we'd like to believe. You had moderate people who wouldn't for a second think about blowing up a bridge or anything like that. And yet, in areas of doctrinal importance, they were willing to defer to somebody who was a major global terrorist. There's no such thing as Islamic democracy if the democracy we're talking about is the true, authentic culture of democracy that is the core of Western civilization. What the Muslim world wants is Sharia, not democracy.
You know, I'm not going to speculate, Bob. What we are focused on now is a transition that will meet the needs of the Egyptian people and that will truly establish democracy, not just for one election and then no more elections after that, or not.
Before 2010, 2011, there was reputable polling that was done in the region. Upwards of 60, 70, or 80% of people told pollsters that they wanted to live under Sharia, most of them under a strict interpretation of Sharia. The way this is played out, when given the choice, given the ability to have free elections, the public in these countries elected Islamists to power. And when the Islamists got power, the first thing that they did was attempt to impose Sharia. In Egypt, certainly, that's exactly what happened.
Jubilation in Cairo's Tahrir Square after the long-awaited declaration of the winner of Egypt's presidential election. The country's election commission announced that Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood won with nearly 52% of the vote. This is the first time modern Egypt will be headed by an Islamist.
Being able to move in Muslim Brotherhood operatives who are now in key positions in the Egyptian military, using prosecutorial authority to repress dissenters and opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood, and most importantly, pushing through a Sharia constitution. Free speech doesn't exist under an Islamic constitution.
Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian satirist, may be the canary in the proverbial coal mine. His prosecution and persecution by the Morsi government appears to be a warning sign of a deep crisis within Egypt's struggling democracy.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is the prime minister of Turkey, probably the most important Islamist politician in the world, And he has famously said that democracy is like a train. When you reach your destination, you step off. And that is the way Islamic supremacists look at democracy. And the reason I think Turkey is so important to look at is because Turkey was the best chance for a democracy to take root. Probably the most interesting and important thing about it is that it had an 80-year secularization experiment. But since they took power, they haven't democratized the place. It was already democratized. They've Islamized it. Turkey now jails more journalists, reporters, political dissidents than almost any country in the world. Erdogan has slowly infiltrated and taken over all the institutions of Turkish society that were the pillars of the Kemalist secular state. It was basically a slow march through Turkey's institutions. And it took about a decade, but he has essentially moved Turkey from the pro-Western camp back into the Islamic supremacist camp.
Today, the Middle East stands on the brink of full-scale conversion to Muslim Brotherhood fanaticism, yet President Obama does not seem to see the problem. President Obama's hand-picked director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said that the Brotherhood is, quote, largely secular, unquote. President Obama seemed unconcerned about the rise of the Brotherhood in Egypt. In fact, he invited Ikhwan members to his Cairo speech in 2009, tailored the speech to meet the Brotherhood's grievances and indulge his narratives. The Obama policy of courting the Muslim Brotherhood has not changed the brothers. It has empowered them to advance their anti-American program. They are now on the verge of control in Egypt and Libya, and their ideology dominates the Muslim world. But what is the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, in 1928, a young Egyptian educator known as the Guide to his followers and Hassan al-Banna to the rest of the world founded a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. The movement was virulently anti-colonial, but not because Banna was a nationalist or an Egyptian patriot. He was neither. Banna's loyalty was to the Muslim Ummah and the ideal that Islam must dominate across national lines. He was anti-colonial because he abhorred the West. The Brotherhood's development was spurred by Turkey's rigorous campaign of secularization. Following the final defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, Kemal Ataturk had spearheaded a successful independence movement, expelling occupiers and establishing an independent state. Determined to turn westward, Ataturk drove Islam out of the public square and marginalized it in the classroom. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, a symbolically shattering event for Muslims. Banna had drawn precisely the opposite conclusion about the sorry state of the Muslim world. For him, Islam was the solution. The problem had been too little of it, not too much, and not just any Islam. Banna had in mind a very particular brand, Salafism. The term Salafiyya comes from a phrase meaning righteous ancestors, referring to Muhammad and his companions. Banna believed that by mixing Islam with modernism, Muslims had strayed from the path. And the only way to restore the Islam of the founders was to implement divine law called Sharia. With Sharia's injunctions firmly in place, the Muslim nation would inevitably rise to the hegemony that was Allah's due. The Brotherhood remains the foremost power in the Middle East because of its credo. Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, and dying in the name of Allah is our highest objective. It's widely perceived to be representative of true Islam. In the late spring of 2011, the Mapping Sharia project published conclusions from an important study. After surveying 100 randomly selected mosques across the United States, the authors found that 81% of them disseminated Islamic texts that advocate violence. In nearly 85% of the mosques, the imam favorably recommended this literature for study by congregants. Moreover, 58% of the mosques invited guest lecturers known for promoting violent jihad. Now, this is the ideology of the Brotherhood, and this is the same Brotherhood that has dominated the so-called Arab Spring.